What's up guys? So today's video we are looking at clean eating versus IIFYM, which is an acronym for If It Fits Your Macros. So we're going to attempt to define what these two concepts are, and we're going to look at the pros and cons between each one. And what you typically find is people sit in one camp versus another camp. So it's kind of an us against them mentality. So you have lots of people who sit in a clean camp and other people who sit in I can eat whatever the hell I want and get away with it camp. Because it fits in my macros. So we're going to be looking at the ins and outs between each one. This is how I feel about it. I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. It's got to be a sustainable approach, guys. So the key question we come back to, and we'll come back to this at the end of the video also, is can you see yourself eating the same way in a year's time? If you can't, and we're not talking about going on a diet and keeping on with that diet for a year. We're talking about creating a sustainable approach over the long term. If you can't see yourself eating the same way next year, the chances are is that approach it isn't right for you. And we need to find an approach which gives you a balance between eating lots of healthy, clean food, whatever that is, and allowing yourself some freedom with regards to the food choices you make also. So what is clean eating? Well, the truth is, guys, this one's quite difficult to answer because there isn't a definitive definition of what makes a food clean. It's very subjective. So the way one person sees a food is very different to how another person sees the food. And one person might see it as clean, someone else may not. But if you're looking for general assumptions, you can probably assume that most people think a clean food is something which is whole or natural or single ingredient and something that's minimally processed also. If It Fits Your Macros, on the other hand, is an approach which pretty much allows you to eat whatever the hell you want, as long as it fits in with your macronutrient targets over the course of the day. So however much protein, carbs or fats you need, you can choose to fill that number via eating whatever foods you want. Nothing is off limits, anything goes, as long as it falls within your macronutrient target for the day. So what we're looking at here, guys, is we're looking at two different concepts. So we're looking at exclusive dieting versus inclusive dieting. So with clean eating, because you have to eat quote unquote clean foods, that's a form of exclusive dieting because you've got a set list or quite a rigid list of foods, and anything that's not on that list you have to exclude because it's not clean. On the other hand, you have an inclusive dieting approach, which is the If It Fits Your Macros, because you don't have to justify including things within the diet because it falls within your macronutrient targets. It's a way of including certain foods within that. Now you've got to view this thing also on kind of a spectrum basis also. So for the guys and girls who do follow an If It Fits Your Macros approach, those guys understand that if they eat pizza and ice cream all the time, just because it fits in within their macros, it's not going to be optimal towards improving their physique. So be it losses in body fat or increases in muscle. Those guys understand that. Now, I guarantee that for people, a large proportion of people who do follow that approach, a great number of calories and total food they consume is going to be from quote unquote clean foods. But they can justify eating that little bit of junk or dirty food because it falls within their macro targets. But the key point being, guys, is that they do understand macro targets and the fact that calories matter in the overall context of improving your body. Now, what sometimes happens with eating clean is that people lose this idea of calories matter, and they justify the fact they don't have to count calories because they're eating clean. Now, I understand that eating clean foods, it's difficult to overconsume clean foods because of the fact they're less caloric dense than quote unquote dirty foods. So you'd have to eat an awful lot of chicken and broccoli to meet the same amount of calories as from a couple of slices of pizza. I get that. But it's still the fact that overall calories over the context of the day, they matter in terms of changing our body composition. So sometimes when people eat clean, they do lose that concept of energy balance and the fact that calories matter at the end of the day. Now, I also wanted to speak about the dieting mindset, which comes from these two approaches also, because that's a really important thing in relation to making sure that your approach towards nutrition is sustainable and achievable over the long term. So if we take a look at clean eating to begin with. Now, as we said from the outset, with clean eating, you typically have a fairly narrow list of foods that you're allowed to eat because they are quote unquote clean. Anything off that list isn't permitted. You're not allowed to eat it. What does it do when you put a food off limits? Probably unconsciously, it's going to increase your cravings for that exact food. So by saying I can't have that thing because it's off limits, all you're going to do is think about having that food even more. So It's fine. Clean eating is really good when you fall between the lines of eating those quote unquote clean foods. But what happens when you can't eat clean because you haven't prepared meals or so on and so forth? What you typically find people do is they go off on these crazy binges where they just don't care about what food is or what food they consume or how many calories they consume. They just lose all scope of energy balance and how much food they're consuming. Is that sustainable over the long term? So you eat clean for a period of time. When you fall off the wagon, you just go hell for leather in terms of consuming whatever the hell you want. That's not a great approach to nutrition. I don't feel it is anyway. If you think about being a little bit more flexible from the outset, so if you think about acknowledging energy balance and how many calories you need, and you eat a large proportion of quote unquote clean foods, you can satisfy those cravings by allowing yourself to eat that little bit of dirty food within the context of your energy balance. And that's going to allow for a far more sustainable, long-term approach towards it, because you're giving yourself preferences towards what you want to eat. You're not needlessly restricting yourselves of foods or at worst food groups. You're acknowledging and satisfying personal taste and preference also. So you end up getting this kind of clean versus dirty, good versus bad mindset where you're viewing things in isolation and you're viewing foods or at worst food groups in isolation. You've got to acknowledge the context of what that food or the role that food plays in the overall plan or the bigger picture. We've spoken about this before. You can't look at things in a vacuum, guys, and you can't acknowledge the short-term effects of eating a quote-unquote dirty food without acknowledging the context of what that food plays in the overall diet plan and the overall concept of the course of the day, or perhaps even longer than that. You know, if allowing that small amount of quote-unquote dirty foods in the overall picture allows you to adhere and stick to the program or the approach that little bit better, that's got to be good for you over the long term. So rather than doing these very short-term periods of eating clean, where you're not satisfied in terms of what you want to eat, and you end up going off the rails and eating ridiculous amounts of calories, why not be a little bit more flexible in the approach? Allow yourself to consume a small amount of calories from quote unquote dirty foods, but they fall within the context of what you require over the course of the day. You know, regardless of the fact, if you're still in a deficit and you've had a little bit of calories from quote unquote dirty foods, it's not going to have the most profound impact on your end result because you're still in that caloric deficit. So don't view things in isolation, guys. Obviously, view the bigger picture. Look at the role that food plays in the overall context of the plan. Respect your personal tastes and preferences. If, as we said, if including certain foods allows you to adhere to something, that's got to be a good thing. Just because I might fall into that grey area in between, it doesn't mean that I don't eat a large proportion of quote-unquote clean foods. I do, and I still continue to promote that with people I work with. Whole food, single ingredient foods should represent a large proportion of where you get your total calories from. Absolutely. They deliver large amounts of micronutrition also. But that remaining kind of caloric intake you could have, be it 10%, 5%, it should respect personal taste and preference, and it should allow you to eat quote unquote some dirty foods if it means that it improves your adherence or your mindset with regards to the approach you're using. You've got to acknowledge the context of energy balance and calories. As long as that 5-10%, whatever you choose, falls within the context of what you need caloric wise and macronutrient wise, I don't see it having the most profound impact on the end result. You've got to think long term here, guys. Also, always think long term. I don't like dieting, so to speak. I prefer to have an approach towards nutrition that just respects energy balance, and therefore usually if I'm looking to burn body fat, I look at creating a deficit, but I don't look at removing certain foods. I just eat a total less calories. If I'm looking at creating a surplus and putting on some muscle, I still eat the same foods and I'm still flexible in my approach. I just eat more of the foods. So I think the truth kind of lies somewhere in the middle, guys, but I want you to stop thinking about things as good versus bad or clean versus dirty. You've always got to respect the context or the role that food plays in the overall picture. No one food in isolation or one meal in isolation, one dirty meal in isolation, is going to be the root cause of the problem. It's going to be the chronic overconsumption of calories or the chronic restriction of calories in terms of a deficit or a surplus that's going to bring about changes in the body, be it weight loss, weight gain, muscle gain, fat loss. Things don't happen over the short term. It's the chronic overconsumption or underconsumption. So always think bigger picture, and I think allowing yourself to have a degree of flexibility within your approach, but an approach that still respects calories and macronutrient nutrition is going to be a much more sustainable and adherable and ultimately enjoyable process, because sometimes people think of these processes and dieting as kind of really restrictive and really they've got to punish themselves. In reality, I don't think that has to be the case. I think there has to be a middle ground where it still respects personal taste and preference, but you're still in a caloric deficit and you're still providing the body with the nutrients it needs to perform optimally. So there we have it, guys. We've looked at the broad concepts of eating clean versus eating dirty, or IIFYM macros. I hope this video has helped give you an introduction. It's helped perhaps formulate a few ideas as to how you might approach nutrition in the future. Please feel free to leave us any comments and questions below and give us some ideas as to what you'd like to see covered in future videos. Until next time, eat clean, eat dirty, respect personal taste and preference, enjoy the process. We'll speak soon.